One strange night, footsteps in the dark, a voice outside my window called me by name. A hand reached out, but it wasn't who I thought. One wrong move, and I might not be alive today to tell this story.
First of all, I'm really sorry, guys.
I wasn't feeling well, and that's why there was a delay in uploading videos. Today, I'm going to share a real-life horror story of one of my close friends. Her name is Emily, and she's 28 years old. Hello, my YouTube family. I'm Naira Vox, a 23-year-old college girl with a curious heart and a love for the unknown. And tonight, I bring you my 10th horror story on this channel. So for the best experience, put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and let your imagination drift into the darkness. If you enjoy the chills and the thrill, show some love in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more haunted tales every day. After the storm that was my divorce, I found myself with nowhere to go except my late grandfather's house. It sits quietly on the edge of Chatham, a small, forgotten town in Alabama. 10 minutes from any sign of life, hidden in 10 acres of thick woods, his old place became my only refuge. It wasn't much. A creaky old house with stubborn doors and icy wooden floors that refused warmth, no matter how high I cranked the heat. But it was free, and at that point, I didn't have the luxury of choice. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent my evenings on the front porch, nursing a beer under the stars. No traffic, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. It felt peaceful, healing even, but peace doesn't last long in places like this. On my 7th night, as I was drifting into sleep around midnight, I heard something strange, a soft, eerie whistling. It wasn't any melody I recognized, just a slow, broken tune. Off-key, uneasy, like someone wandering aimlessly through the woods behind the house, whistling as they moved. It unsettled me, but I brushed it off. Maybe a hunter, or some neighbor who'd had one too many drinks. I didn't think much of it, until it happened again. Same time, same haunting whistle. But this time it was closer. I got up, flipped on the porch light, and stepped outside with a flashlight. The night was still cold. No movement, no footsteps, just that eerie whistling, fading into the trees. I wanted to believe it was nothing, so I tried to ignore it. For a couple more nights, I just laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, hoping to sleep through it. But each time around 1:15 a.m., sometimes 1:17 or 1:19, like some twisted routine, it would start again. The same whistle, the same creeping feeling under my skin. I began to wonder, was someone doing this on purpose? Someone who knew I was all alone? Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I called the local sheriff's office. An older deputy, I'll just call him Deputy H, showed up a few days later. Said he'd been around this town for decades. He took one look at the house, then at the woods behind it, and the look in his eyes told me he already knew something. And I wish I hadn't asked him what. If you want to hear the rest of this story, make sure you subscribe. But be warned, some things once heard can never be unheard. When I told Deputy H about what I was hearing, his face changed. The man went quiet, like I'd triggered something old inside him. Then he said, almost whispering, "Your granddaddy used to call us about the same thing. Said someone was whistling around the house late at night. Always in the spring. We never found anything. I thought he was just aging. But now you're hearing it too." That hit me like a punch to the chest. I had no idea my grandfather had gone through the same thing. Deputy H told me to keep everything locked and not to step outside after dark. I was already doing that, honestly. I started triple-checking every window, every latch. Some nights, I even wedged chairs under doorknobs just to feel a little safer. But it didn't matter. The whistling got bolder. One night, I heard it just behind the shed, louder than it had ever been, like someone was standing just out of sight. I crept to the window, flashlight in hand, and peeked through the blinds. No one. But I couldn't force myself to open that door. The next night, it came from the front porch. 3 long, drawn-out whistles, right outside my door. Then silence. But what came after that still haunts me. The whistling came from beneath the house. I'm not kidding. It was like someone was in the crawl space, breathing that broken melody up through the vents. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The next morning, I pulled down the attic stairs and started searching through my grandfather's old belongings, desperate for answers. I found them in a box of his journals. He wrote about it, about the same haunting whistles, year after year. Always in spring, always after dark. He never found out who it was, but he believed someone was watching the house. He said it only started after my grandmother died, when he was living here completely alone. He used to sit by the door with a rifle in his lap, just waiting. I called Deputy H again. This time, he came over, sat down, and read through those journals himself. He looked shaken, genuinely disturbed. Then he looked at me and said, "Be careful. And whatever you do, don't open that door unless you know who's on the other side." That night, I didn't go to bed. I sat in the living room, shotgun across my lap, hands trembling. A shotgun I barely knew how to use. And I waited. Have you ever heard something that didn't make sense? Something you felt more than you saw? Drop your stories in the comments. I'm not the only one, right? Want to know what happened next? Subscribe, because what comes after the whistle is something you need to hear. I waited. At 1:17 a.m., just like before, the sound returned. But this time, it didn't come from outside. It came from inside the house. The whistling echoing softly from the hallway. I froze. The hallway light was off. I couldn't see anything, just the sound creeping closer, step by step. I stood up, shotgun in hand, voice shaking. "Who's there?" Silence. The whistling just stopped. I reached for the switch and flipped on the hallway light. No one. Nothing there. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. 2 days passed. No whistling. No footsteps. No signs. But I was falling apart, sick with anxiety. I couldn't explain why this was happening to me or to my grandfather. But it was real. I knew it was real. This wasn't some hallucination. This wasn't a ghost story. This was a person. And they had been inside my home. On the 3rd night, things were quiet again. Almost too quiet. I turned in just after midnight, too exhausted to stay up. But I left the hallway light on, just in case. At exactly 1:17 a.m., something new woke me. Not whistling. Knocking. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate. Measured. Coming from the back door. Then silence. I stayed frozen in bed, listening. A moment later, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Then another. Someone was moving. And then click. The hallway light went out. I grabbed the shotgun. My chest was pounding so hard, I could barely breathe. I stepped out into the hallway. It was pitch black. But at the far end, standing in the shadows, I saw something. A person, wearing black, face pale, motionless, watching me. I raised the shotgun, but my hands were trembling uncontrollably. I tried to say something, anything, but my mouth was too dry to speak. My arms shook. My heart raced. And that thing didn't move. Have you ever felt someone watching you from the shadows when you knew you were supposed to be alone? The next part is where everything unravels. Follow the sound and don't miss what's coming next. Don't move, I yelled, my voice barely holding steady. In the dim light, I saw them shift. One foot lifted. They turned, slow at first, like they were considering something. Stop, I shouted again. But they didn't stop. They bolted out of the hallway and vanished into the night. I heard them, loud footsteps crashing across the floorboards and out the front door.
Gone.
I ran after them.
Heart pounding.
I raised the shotgun and fired. Not into the air, straight into the darkness.
Low.
Hoping maybe, just maybe, it would hit something. Don't come back. I screamed into the void. The shot echoed, deafening, bouncing off the walls and porch rails. My ears rang like hell. I didn't wait. I locked every door, jumped in my truck, and drove straight into town. That night, I slept in the driver's seat. When the sun came up, Deputy H met me back at the house. The front door was unlocked again. That changed everything. Whoever that person was had a key. No signs of a break-in. Nothing stolen. But they had been inside. Deputy H looked more serious than ever. He told me to change the locks. And off the record, he said maybe it was time to leave. Somebody out there doesn't want you in that house. Didn't want your granddad there either. I didn't hesitate. That same day, I replaced every lock on that house. Then I packed a bag and headed to my parents' place out of state. Eventually, we cleaned out what mattered: photo albums, journals, my grandfather's rifle. The rest? We either sold it or left it behind. Dad eventually put the house up for sale. And no, he didn't mention the part about someone watching it for decades. I still don't know how they had a key. I still don't know who they were. I don't know why Grandpa never told anyone. But I know it's real. I believe someone out there, someone unwell, had made my grandfather, and later me, their obsession. Maybe they lived nearby. Maybe they're still out there. I couldn't stay in the countryside anymore. That house, that whole experience, it scarred me. I'm 16 now, living in the city. But I spent my first 8 years surrounded by woods and silence. And sometimes, even now when I close my eyes, I swear I can hear that same whistle. If your childhood home held a terrifying secret, would you ever go back? For more real horror, true stories, and chilling whispers in the dark, hit that follow. And remember, not everything in the woods is just the wind. We both stopped dead in our tracks when they came closer. The tall guys moved silently, like they knew we were there, but hadn't made a sound. I could feel the sweat on my back getting colder, and for a moment, I wished I could disappear into the ground. Julian seemed as nervous as I was, but neither of us spoke. The tall guys didn't look like they were in any hurry. One of them, the one on the left, gave us a strange smile, though it was hard to tell in the dimming light. His hood was pulled up low, but I could see his eyes, dark, almost too dark. "Hey," the guy said, his voice smooth like he knew exactly how to scare us. "What are you two doing out here?"
I didn't know what to say.
The heat was making my head spin, and I was too nervous to make a sound. Julian surprisingly spoke up. "We're just looking for mint leaves for Mrs. Helen," he said, his voice shaky, but louder than I expected. "She's going to make tea for her birthday." The tall guy on the right chuckled softly, like he was amused by the whole situation. He leaned in closer, and I caught a whiff of something strange, a smell I couldn't place. Not bad, just off. like old leaves mixed with something wet and earthy. "You know," he said, eyes gleaming in the fading sunlight, "there's a much easier way to get those mint leaves." I felt my stomach twist. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear the answer. The guy smiled wider, like he was enjoying every second of our discomfort. "You could take a shortcut if you know where to look." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and started walking away, the other guy following without a word. They moved slowly, like they weren't in any hurry. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, swallowed by the trees. Julian and I stood there, frozen, the silence between us thick with something we couldn't name. We never spoke about those guys again, but I think we both knew something had shifted in that moment. A strange, unsettling feeling hung in the air, like we were no longer alone in the woods. This continuation keeps the creepy suspense while deepening the mystery around the two figures. The presence of the tall guys feels increasingly ominous, and their cryptic words raise questions without offering answers, leaving you on edge. The taller one, who had been the quiet one up until now, finally spoke. His voice was still that same friendly, childish tone, but now it carried a strange undertone, like he was playing some kind of game that we weren't part of. "Oh, we've seen a field of mint, yes," he trailed off, almost as if savoring the thought, then added, "but it's not the kind you're looking for." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I glanced at Julian, whose grip on my arm tightened. His face had gone pale, his eyes darting between the two strangers. Something was off. His eyes flicked nervously toward the trees, like he was measuring the distance back to the village, trying to figure out if we could make a run for it. The guy who had crouched down beside me straightened up, still smiling, his grin far too wide for comfort. "You know, it's funny. People always think mint is just for tea." He paused, letting the words linger in the air, then added with a knowing look, "But it's really for something else. Something older." I felt my stomach twist, and the heat from the sun seemed to grow more suffocating. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky, though I tried to mask it with a forced laugh. Before either of them could answer, Julian tugged me harder. His voice was strained now. "We need to go.
Now."
But I was frozen. I couldn't tear my gaze away from them. There was something about the way they looked at us, like we were part of a story they were telling, but we weren't the ones in control. It felt like we were the prey, and they were circling, just waiting for the right moment. The second guy, the one who hadn't spoken much, stepped closer to us, his hands still in his pockets. He tilted his head, and there was something about the way he moved unnatural, too smooth, like he knew exactly how to make us feel small. "We wouldn't want you to miss it," he said, his voice soft, coaxing. "It's really not that far. Just beyond the hill. We'll show you the way." I felt my chest tighten. Something about their invitation, the way they phrased everything, made my skin crawl. There was no way I was going to go anywhere with them. But before I could protest, Julian's hand shot out, gripping my arm tightly. "Let's go now," he hissed, his face urgent, eyes wide with fear. Finally, the spell seemed to break. We both turned and started walking quickly, not looking back, even as we heard them call out almost sweetly, "It's a shame you won't see it. You'll miss out on something special." We didn't stop running until we were back in the village, breathless and shaking. The sound of their voices, so calm and yet so chilling, still echoed in my ears. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that they were watching us, waiting for the right moment to make their move. I never saw them again after that day, but the memory of those strange, unsettling smiles still haunts me. And sometimes when I pass the old mint field on the edge of town, I wonder if they're still out there, waiting for the next kids to come by, just like we did. This version heightens the unease and danger, while maintaining the creepy, childlike charm of the strangers. Julian's instincts to get away come through strongly, showing his protective side, while the mysterious figure's intentions remain cryptic. The fact that they know too much and don't seem to care about the typical social boundaries makes their behavior all the more unsettling. We didn't look back. Julian's grip on my hand was like a lifeline, pulling me faster than I had ever run before. My heart was pounding in my chest, and the only sound I could hear was the rush of our footsteps on the forest floor. The trees blurred by as we sprinted downhill, our breath coming in ragged gasps. My legs burned, but I didn't dare stop, not with that whisper echoing in my head. Run. The deeper we ran into the forest, the more everything felt wrong. The air seemed thicker, almost suffocating, and the woods around us had a strange, almost unnatural stillness. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I could hear the sounds of the forest, crickets, birds, rustling leaves, faintly in the distance, but it was like they were all too far away, too muffled. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and closing in. I could hear them getting closer, just behind us. My body froze for a split second, and I dared not look back, terrified of what I might see. The footsteps weren't the hurried, panicked running of someone escaping. They were the slow, calm strides of someone who knew they were in control. The guys were following us. "Don't run," one of them called out, his voice eerily calm, as if the chase was all part of the plan. "You're going to make us chase you, huh?" I couldn't tell if I was hearing things or if they were actually gaining on us, but the chill that ran through me was enough to make my blood run cold. I glanced at Julian. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror, and for the first time, I realized he was no longer just scared. He was terrified, and so was I, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let go of his hand. I stumbled over a root, almost falling, but Julian pulled me up without missing a beat. We kept running, our feet pounding against the forest floor, our breaths shallow and quick. But even in our desperation, there was no sign of escape. The trees felt like they were closing in around us, like the forest itself was trapping us. The more we ran, the darker the world around us seemed to get. And then, just when I thought we couldn't run any further, we reached a clearing. But it wasn't a safe place. The clearing was eerily quiet, the air thick with an unnatural silence. The moonlight barely broke through the canopy, casting everything in shadow. We were in the middle of it now, and I had no idea which way to go. Julian was breathing heavily, his face set in determination, but I could see the fear in his eyes. The clearing was wide, but it felt too open, like we had just run straight into the middle of a trap. Suddenly, there was a rustle from the trees behind us. The two figures stepped into the clearing. They had somehow managed to catch up with us without a sound, and they were smiling. Their smiles were wide, far too wide, and their eyes were gleaming with something I couldn't place. "Did you really think you could escape?" one of them asked, his voice low and almost mocking. I stood frozen, my mind racing for an escape, but my legs refused to move. My body was paralyzed by fear, my heart racing. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, suffocating me. Julian whispered urgently, "Don't make a sound.
Just keep calm."
We can get out of this."
But how?
How could we possibly get out of this? Then the ground beneath us shifted. There was no sound, but the earth beneath our feet seemed to sink, just for a moment, like it was swallowing us whole. And for a second, I thought I saw something move in the shadows, a figure taller than the rest, watching us from the trees. My skin crawled. Everything in me screamed to run, but it was too late. The two figures were too close now. The distance had closed, and there was no way out. We were trapped. This continuation brings the fear of being pursued to a fever pitch, while introducing the sense that they are no longer in control of the situation. There's a sharp contrast between the kids' innocent curiosity and the sinister forces around them. The figures remain a mystery, as does the unnatural atmosphere of the forest, making it feel like a nightmare unfolding. I ran as if my life depended on it. And honestly, it probably did. Behind us, I could hear the two men shouting in frustration, chasing us relentlessly. My body was shaking uncontrollably, and I couldn't stop crying, overwhelmed with fear. My legs kept moving, but I barely felt like I was breathing. Somehow, I managed to run almost 2 kilometers back toward the village without stopping for a single breath. When we finally arrived, completely exhausted, the woman who had sent us to find Mint noticed the terror on our faces. Our bodies were drenched in sweat, our skin pale, as if all the life had drained from us. I can't remember exactly when those men stopped chasing us, but by the time we reached her home, they were nowhere to be seen. She brought us inside, offering us chocolate to help calm us down. She asked what had happened, and Julian, who was far more composed than I was at the time, explained everything. When he finished, her expression shifted to one of concern, and she scolded us for being so naive. She blamed Julian, saying I didn't want to follow them, but he insisted. As a result of the incident, Julian was grounded and wasn't allowed outside to play for an entire month. That experience left a lasting impact on me. Even now, much older, I can't help but wonder who those men were or what their intentions were. Looking back, I can only guess, and the thought still chills me. While we were running, there was a real risk of me tripping on the downhill slope, but I somehow managed to stay on my feet. If it weren't for Julian, who is now my boyfriend, I don't even want to think about what might have happened. Growing up, my parents worked tirelessly, each holding down 2 jobs to make ends meet. They were often absent, leaving my older brother, Cameron, and me to fend for ourselves most of the time. To help with that, they hired a babysitter from an online site, a young woman named Michelle, probably in her early 20s. For 4 or 5 months, Michelle came over every weekday to look after us. At 7 years old, and with Cam just a year older, we were thrilled to have Michelle around. She was young, polite, and full of energy, which made her way more fun to hang out with than any tired, cranky old lady. Cam and I did online classes since school would have been too much for our parents to handle, and Michelle helped us a lot with that. When summer came, my parents told Michelle to take a break and enjoy her vacation. They felt she deserved it after everything she'd done for us. But that meant we wouldn't have a babysitter for the summer. My parents didn't want to go through the hassle of finding someone new, so they decided to take Cam and me to our grandparents' house for the summer. Our grandparents lived in the countryside of Texas, quite a drive from our home in Oklahoma. But considering we'd be there for the whole summer, it seemed worth the long trip. We started the drive on Saturday, and while the scenery was beautiful, to my young self, the entire ride felt endless and made me feel sick. Finally, we arrived at their place, which felt like it took forever. It was a cozy cabin-style house in the middle of a huge open field with woods at the back. Off to the side was a barn-like building that housed animals like cows, goats, chickens, and other cool things. We greeted everyone, and right away, my grandpa wanted to give Cam and me a little tour of the property. My parents stayed inside, chatting with my grandma while she cooked us a nice dinner. The evening was perfect. We caught up with Grandma and Grandpa and even played with their dog, Cora. When it was time to go to bed, Cam and I shared a room with a bunk bed and a TV. The room next door was for my parents, who fell asleep quickly after the long drive. They needed to rest since they had work on Monday and had to head back the next day. Cam and I stayed up a little longer, watching cartoons on the TV. Eventually, we both drifted off to sleep with the TV still on. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy footsteps outside my window. The blinds kept me from seeing anything, but the steps were loud and unmistakable. They didn't wake Cam since the TV was still on, but I heard them clearly. Then, a strange noise came from the window. After a couple of seconds, I heard a grunt, and it sounded like someone was trying to open it. I hurried to my parents' room to tell them. They didn't believe me at first, assuming it was just my imagination. But when they checked, there was nothing there. They just brushed it off as some animal, especially since we were in the middle of nowhere, and maybe my young mind had just misinterpreted the sounds. I eventually fell back asleep after lying there for about 5 minutes. The next morning, I woke up to the wonderful smell of breakfast cooking in the kitchen, and my parents were packing to leave. We had breakfast together before they headed off. Once they left, my grandpa took Cam and me to feed the animals and take Cora, the dog, for a walk. I wanted to hold Cora's leash, so my grandpa handed it to me, reminding me to hold on tight. As we walked along the trail, I found myself having to tug on Cora every few steps. Curious, I looked down to see why she wasn't walking and noticed she was staring intently at something. She was fixated on the woods. I hesitated for a moment, but then I looked in the direction she was staring. That's when I saw it, a black figure standing still, just staring at us. Despite being completely dark, the figure stood out against the backdrop of the woods. I could feel the man's gaze on us, hidden partially behind a tree, his hands resting on the bark, as though he was trying to peek at us without fully revealing himself. I turned to share this with my grandpa, but by then he and Cam had already moved ahead. I hurried to catch up, tugging on Cora's leash, but when I finally told my grandpa about the man, the figure was gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I was certain I would have seen him if he'd run, but there was no trace of him. My grandpa had heard about the strange noises from the night before, so he knew I wasn't just imagining things. I could see the concern in his expression, but he calmly explained that it was probably just a deer, and when I ran, I must have startled it. After feeding the animals, we returned to the cabin. The rest of the day was spent watching movies and playing outside with the sprinklers. That evening, Grandma made a delicious dinner, and we ate together. I felt really tired afterward and took a quick 10-minute bath. Cam and I headed back to our room, where we watched a bit of TV before falling asleep. Around 1 a.m., I was startled awake by humming outside the window. The tune was the theme song of Cyber Chase, the show we had been watching earlier. Cam, as usual, didn't stir, but I could clearly hear the humming through the blinds. I couldn't see anything, but I was certain it was someone out there. At first, I thought it might be my grandpa out for a smoke, but something felt off. He began humming the Cyber Chase intro, as if he had heard it through the window. At the time, I convinced myself it was a silly explanation, but being the kid I was, I still called out, "Grandpa." The humming abruptly stopped. After a brief pause, I heard a voice say, "Hey, it's Grandpa. Come out here, kid. I want to show you something cool." I quickly slipped on my shoes and stepped outside. Although the night was completely dark, I could see how the sky above was filled with stars. I reached the window, and there, standing just outside, was what I thought was my grandpa. He extended his hand to me, and I took it. He started walking me towards the barn without saying a word. Confused, I asked where we were headed, but there was no response. I began to feel uneasy. Why would Grandpa be outside at 1 a.m., wearing a hoodie and wanting to show me something cool? Then, as I focused on his hand, I realized something chilling. It wasn't my grandpa's hand. The person holding mine was much younger. My heart raced. I tried to pull away, but the grip tightened, forcing me to stay still. I didn't want to give away that I had figured it out. Then I noticed something else. There was a long handle protruding from the back of his pants. That's when my panic set in. Just then, I heard my grandpa's voice calling from the house. I stayed silent, but the man turned toward the sound. That split-second distraction was all I needed. I yanked my hand free and started backing away. The man stood frozen for a moment before darting toward the woods. I bolted back to the house, shouting for help. By the time I reached the door, my grandpa was standing there, his arms open, and my grandma was on the phone, urgently speaking to the police. Not long after, the officers arrived and began searching the area. They found the man hiding in a nearby ditch, and, shockingly, he had taken items from the barn. Most disturbing of all, they discovered an axe tucked in his pants. As they investigated further, the police soon discovered that the lock on my grandpa's shed had been broken, leaving it wide open for anyone to take whatever they wanted. Inside the shed, there were various tools that could have been used for even more trouble. A few days later, my grandpa learned the man was actually Michelle's ex-boyfriend, a guy named Dave. Dave confessed that he had been watching us for a while and had planned to take me that night. He figured it would be easier to abduct a little girl, so I was his target. Dave explained that he wanted to kidnap me because he knew how much Michelle cared for me. His twisted plan was to use me as leverage, threatening to harm me if Michelle didn't do what he wanted. He said that his ultimate goal was to get back together with Michelle and start a new life with her, though he claimed he never intended to actually hurt me. After the whole ordeal, our parents picked up Cam and me a week later and started searching for new jobs that would allow them to be home with us more often. They also let Michelle go, which, in hindsight, was the right thing to do. I'm incredibly thankful that the police station wasn't far from my grandparents' house. But most of all, I'm forever grateful that my grandpa had woken up that night to use the bathroom. Even now, after 20 years, I still get chills thinking about what could have happened if he hadn't been awake.